Well, how there? Hey there, Power Pagers. My name is Brian Knight. I'm here with Nick as well. We'll introduce ourselves in just a second. But while we're waiting, start queuing up those questions. This is an AMA session. Ask us anything or ask me anything. But today's session is very open-ended. We'll be showing a little bit of demos potentially. We'll have some questions that I know we had queued up ahead of time from you guys. But if you have your own question, that you have a burning question around Power Pages or Power Apps that have to do with Power Pages, go ahead and queue those up inside of the chat panel, and we'll have some assistants in the background kind of starring those for us. My name is Brian Knight from Pragmatic. We're a training company that focuses on the Power Platform and the Azure Stack. And then I've been an MVP for 19 years now, I believe. But again, I started on the data side and then went over to the side of the Power App side during the COVID era. I also, I've written about 18 books. You can find those books outside the abandoned Blockbuster video on weekends. I sell them next to the guy who sells the pit bulls. And then with me today is a good friend of ours, Nick. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself also?
Sure, yeah. I'm Nick Hayduk. I'm the owner of Engineered Code, and I've been an MVP for, I think, 14 fewer years than Brian, so only 5 for me. I've written 0 books, unfortunately, but I've written many blog posts. We do lots of videos, and my specialty is Power Pages. I actually started my career with a company called ADX Studio, which was the company that built what is now known as Power Pages. They built ADX Studio portals, which turned into Dynamics 365 portals when Microsoft acquired them, which then turned into Power Apps portals, and is now Power Pages. So I've been working with ADX Studio portals, Power Pages for the last 15 years or so. Really happy to have the opportunity here to chat with Brian and the rest of you folks and ask any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. Also, Nick, people are starting to pile in right now, and I'm sure we'll get some questions in a few minutes. But while we're waiting for those, we had some questions that were asked ahead of time on social media. One of those questions was really around how is Power Pages different than the rest of the Power Platform? I know we both have our answers on that, but you want to go ahead and start first on that?
Yeah. I think one of the things to know about the Power Platform, especially for people who are maybe new to the Power Platform, is maybe despite what the Microsoft marketing department might tell you, it's actually a whole bunch of different things that have kind of come together and kind of branded under one thing, but a lot of them come from different places. So when we talk about things that maybe came from the SharePoint world or the Dynamics 365 world or kind of these different worlds, are all kind of smushed together and now called Power Platform, but some things are more similar to other than other pieces. So when we talk about Power Pages, where they really come from is the Dynamics CRM world. So if you're familiar with model-driven apps, if you're familiar with Dynamics CRM, that's the world that Power Pages came from. So as compared to something like, say, like Canvas apps or Power Automate or Power BI, everything hopefully kind of works together. I mean, that's Microsoft's goal, is to make everything work together as nicely as possible. But really, Power Pages, if you've got that experience with the old Dynamics CRM, model-driven apps, Dynamics 365 customer engagement, whatever, all the different things that is called these days, that's where Power Pages essentially came from. Originally, it was built as an add-on to Dynamics CRM. So that's the world in which it came from.
Yeah, and you'll see that Dynamics URL in quite a few of the areas in Power Platform in general. But to me, it's really a use case scenario also. So if you think about, you want to expose that data that you might have from in Dataverse right now. And Dataverse is that big database that Dynamics uses, as well as a lot of Power Platform. And for me, it comes down to really a use case of exposing it to people outside of your organization. You could license every individual for Power Apps, but what a pain in the butt, and how expensive is that going to be? By putting it into Power Pages, you're licensing the capacity for those people to come in, and you're not having to go and name every individual that might have an email address. So, Nick, what kind of use cases have you seen out there for Power Pages, whether it be governmental entities or companies or whatever?
Yeah, I think the number one kind of classic use case would be help desk. That's the one that for many years within the Dynamics 365 Dynamics CRM space, the integration with the cases, so the help desk ticket type scenario, super, super popular. And I would say that, I would say the majority of the implementations that we're working on with Power Pages, that's where they start. They say, hey, we want our users to be able to submit a help desk ticket. I think the other big one that we see quite a bit is partner portals. So organizations working with their partner organizations, often, they're working with other people selling their products or selling their services, and they need a place for those people to update opportunities, create their deals, create their customers. Because again, as you mentioned, Brian, yeah, you could license them as internal users. It'd be expensive. And honestly, like the interface, I mean, we all love the interface of model-driven apps, right? They're perfect. They couldn't improve in any way, except for maybe they could be a little bit simpler. So that's what you get with Power Pages. Is you get a simpler interface, something that's more intuitive for users who are only using it, once a month or once a week, that sort of thing. It's not an interface where you have to have a 5-day long training session on how to use. So that's the thing we really like about Power Pages.
Well, and you said something there that's really intriguing. So imagine you're a university also, and you have some of the universities in the United States. Nick's in Canada. I'm in Florida, Jacksonville here. Some of the universities right near us have over 100,000 students. And you don't want to go and license 100,000 students for something they might use once every 4 years. Like you might, like for a change of major request or a housing request or some kind of incident that might be occurring. So at Power Pages, you're only licensing the ability for them to come in. And you might have different students coming in each month, and that's completely fine. We implemented one during the COVID era for citizens coming in and uploading an application for COVID assistance at that time. And there's almost 1 million people in our county. And having licensing all those people for Power Apps would not make sense. And the coolest part about it was we were able to get it live in about 2 weeks, live and in beta in a weekend, where building something like that out in .NET or in PHP might have taken weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months, to build out. The closest competitor was saying they needed about 4 months to build it out. So yeah, good use case. I love the ones you mentioned there also. So Nick, as far as the experience of what do you think is needed to hit the ground running in the Power Platform?
Yeah, I mean, specifically with Power Pages, as I mentioned, they're really built on top of the model-driven app framework or on that structure. So a lot of what you're doing with Power Pages is you're building lists and you're building forms, and those are all as defined in Power in your model-driven app. So when you're building out Power Pages, if you aren't already familiar with model-driven apps, creating views, creating forms, that sort of things, that's a skill set that you're going to want to do. Now, on top of that, I think the one place where Power Pages is quite a bit different than the rest of the Power Platform is that if you're going to extend Power Pages beyond what you can do with just kind of the drag and drop, low code, no code type of thing, it's much more like traditional web development than any other parts that I see in the Power Platform. So, for example, we see developers that are familiar with writing or extending model-driven apps with JavaScript, and then they try and take those skills over to Power Pages, and it's a little bit different because within Power Pages we don't have this API that we can use. It's a lot less structured than it is in the rest of the Power Platform. It's more, traditional web development. You can kind of do whatever you want with JavaScript. Of course, there's, best practices, that sort of thing. But there's a lot more that you can do on Power Pages. But for those familiar with kind of more having these kind of guidelines of like, you can do this, this, and this, that doesn't really exist with Power Pages. So there's a lot more freedom and flexibility. But with that comes essentially this, you kind of got to come from that background of a web developer. You got to kind of embrace the fact that, hey, I'm going to use the developer tools. I'm going to explore, and I'm going to see what I can achieve by writing JavaScript.
Yeah, and as Nick mentioned, it also uses things like Bootstrap, classic HTML, all the kind of stuff you would see when you're building a website out. Now, I agree with Nick also. Learning how to build a model-driven app and solutions and all the kind of the life cycle of building an app in Power Apps, traditional Power Apps, Dataverse, and all those kind of goodies is one of the main core prerequisites for that. That kind of leads into a question I'm seeing from Ramesh here as well. But ultimately, as Nick mentioned, building a basic Power Page is super, super simple. You can get it launched very quickly. It's when the customer says, well, what about this? I want extra validation here. And that's where the JavaScript stuff that Nick is bringing up really comes in handy. Nick, we have a great question here from Ramesh here. Because I have a good experience on Canvas apps and Power Automate, and a beginner on the Dataverse side. I have zero experience when it comes to pro code experience. How important is pro code skills with my learning path? What do you think, Nick?
So it really depends on how particular the client is in that case, because there's a lot. I would say, a high percentage of the business use cases that we see that you can achieve with out of the box stuff, or for the things where there's a little bit of extra validation, you'll often find examples online that you can essentially kind of copy and paste and get in there. So, you can accomplish a whole lot without writing a single line of code. However, if you're if you're building this for someone who's very particular about the user interface and they want to work in a very specific way, that's where that custom code comes in. Now, that doesn't mean what comes out of the box is necessarily bad. It's just kind of different. So often when we're working with our clients and they say, "Hey, can we bring our own designers to this, and can they design it?" Absolutely, they can. There's really not many interfaces that you can't do with Power Pages. But to me, the real value of Power Pages are those lists and forms that kind of come out of the box, and you can kind of build using those. And so if you're going to take all that, throw it out, and build it all from scratch, then what is it that you're using this platform for? So I think there's a lot you can achieve. But if you're dealing with someone who's very particular and wants to essentially draw you a picture and say, match this, that's where you're going to really need to know the pro code techniques.
Yeah, that's a good point. .NET or PHP might be a better option in those cases also, as you're mentioning. Like getting your basic list, your basic forms. You can follow Nick's series on YouTube or my series on YouTube, and you can get most of the education you're going to need to get started in that. And you'll see, I'll share my screen real quick and kind of elaborate a little bit on what we're talking about here. If I were to hop, there we go. Thank you, Devin. The background, by the way, we got Jose and we got Devin who are kind of helping moderate here. But you'll notice that when I sign to Power Pages, I'm only showing 2 different providers, but you have really almost a dozen providers you can do, and you can customize your own providers. But this is just a really, really basic. This was built in about 15 minutes for this session today for looking at patient records, for example. So I'm a patient. I want to go to my new patient form, and you're going to see kind of this little wizard right here. And again, this was built in under an hour. So if you want now the customization I have done on this is I've uploaded some CSS that kind of I bring to every kind of starting point here. But as you kind of go through this, if you want to really, really change the way this form looks and change the way the wizard looks, like for example, on this next screen here, not this one, but right here below, this is a classic list, which maps to a view inside a Dataverse. And if I want to customize the way this looks, then that's where some of the coding might come in at that point. Nick, along those same lines of coding, what do you think? What kind of coding languages do you think are really? You mentioned JavaScript already. JavaScript's great for doing things like data validation. Nick and I were mentioning earlier, our masking of a social security address or a salary column. Those things are easily done. But where else might you see like JavaScript versus things like other coding languages in here?
Yeah. So the big one that's kind of somewhat proprietary to Power Pages, especially in the Power Platform, is a language called Liquid, which is a server-side language. So that means that your end users aren't going to see your Liquid code; they're going to see the result of the code. So they're going to see what happens after the code is run. And Liquid is a great tool for interacting with Dataverse data, but it is read-only. So that's kind of the big limitation. Whereas with JavaScript, within the last couple of years here, Microsoft has introduced a web API. So from Power Pages, we can call into Dataverse and we can start talking with Dataverse. We can read data, create rows, edit rows, delete rows. We can do all that fun stuff with Dataverse data. So JavaScript really is the number one skill that you'd want to learn if you're wanting to extend Power Pages. With Liquid, Liquid is a templating language. So the idea is that you get data from Dataverse and you can display it in a really, really nice way. So if you don't like, say, how the list is, Instead of showing it in kind of a table, you can show it in a card format or all sorts of different things. So Liquid is definitely that one language. Liquid is actually created by Shopify, which is another Canadian company that is big in the e-commerce space. So they created Liquid and then kind of open source that. And then many years ago, ADX Studio incorporated it into their product. So Liquid is a great tool. You can also start doing C# if you're familiar with some of the other server-side technologies. There's a number of different ways that you can incorporate C# into your project, whether that's using plugins in Dataverse, because again, Power Pages are built on top of Dataverse. You have to use Dataverse. Everything's built into Dataverse. So if you're creating rows in Dataverse on your Power Pages site, then obviously your plugins are going to run as well. And then in even more kind of advanced scenarios, there's an architecture known as a companion app where you can essentially build a C# web service and kind of talk to it that way. So again, there's really not much that you can't do on Power Pages, but for sure the number one skill, if you're wanting to extend Power Pages, would be JavaScript for sure.
Gotcha. Now, Nick, a little backstory here. I'm kind of curious. You mentioned Liquid was used by Shopify. Why did ADX Studio pick Liquid as its open source language? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was after I wasn't at ADX Studio at the time, but I think they were looking for a way to with a server-side language, you get a little bit more kind of security in terms of people aren't seeing your code. You can do some security trimming on that code. So if you're querying data and you only want to show certain results, when you're doing that server side, there's a bit more security built in there. Now, Liquid specifically, I know what happened was it was originally, I'm not sure what language it was originally built in, but someone built a port over to .NET. So I think it was a pretty easy language to integrate into the product because essentially there was an open source port in .NET. So I think it made it pretty simple for them to incorporate.
Oh, that's awesome. And just one more note about the JavaScript side also. One of the use cases is replicating some of the things you might have in Dataverse, like your business rules that you have in Dataverse. At this time, do not come over to, at least I haven't heard of this, let that come over to portals. So you might have to replicate some of those business rules for showing and hiding fields, for locking fields, making read-only inside of JavaScript also. It's not terrible. We do have a lot of videos that we built around that also. We have had some more questions that are coming in now also, Nick. Let's see here. We got a question here from the Tech Explorers. Is there a try it free option? How can somebody get started with Power Pages? One of the best way of getting started really is the developer edition for Power Platform. If you just do a quick search for Power Apps Developer Edition, you can use it, or you can use the trial edition. And then from that, it gives you a forever free environment for doing Power Platform. No license required. However, Power Pages, the trial for Power Pages lasts 30 days. Nick, add what he wants to add to this as well. After 30 days, you can always reactivate the site again, but it's that's the best way to get started and kind of get used to things. Nick, do you have anything else you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, so in the last couple of months, the Power Pages team have introduced developer instances of Power Pages that do continue to live on. So within your Power Apps developer environment, if you create a Power Pages site, it will be licensed as a developer Power Pages site. And as long as it's active, so it's used kind of once every 30 days, it will continue to live on in perpetuity. So I think that's a great way to try the platform. My one biggest challenge with the developer instance is that it is for Power Platform and doesn't include any of the Dynamics apps. So when we talk about, say, specifically for the support desk, the support desks, there are certain templates. So when you go in to install Power Pages, you pick a certain template, and there are about 4 of those templates that are built specifically for Dynamics 365, and those will include the out-of-the-box work that gives you a help desk, and those are either the employee self-service, customer self-service, community, and partner are the 4 templates that if you install those, you will actually get a help desk kind of out of the box. Now, unfortunately, those require you to have Dynamics installed in your environment because they're built on top of the case or the incident entity, or the table, I guess they call them now. So if you don't have those, which in the Power Apps development environment you don't, because you only get kind of the base Dataverse, you don't get the whole Dynamics environment. So if you want to play around with the help desk functionality, then your best bet is to do a trial of Dynamics, and then you can install things there. But in perpetuity, I totally correct, Brian, that the developer instance, that's what I use on an ongoing basis when I'm doing my demos or trainings or that sort of things. I have a developer instance that I use, and it works great, other than, like I said, just access to those extra templates that require the Dynamics licensing.
Awesome, thank you. And then speaking of which, to kind of elaborate a little more, Deb, would you mind putting my computer on the screen also? So you'll notice what Nick was referring to when I go in to create a new site, that is a whole Dynamics 365 category right here, where, you notice in my case, I don't have Dynamics installed. This is a developer environment where I don't have that. But if I did have that installed, you would see a whole bunch of other templates that make it way, way, way easier for you as a developer to do this. So thank you, Devin. So another question here. Let's see. We got some good ones now. Here is one for. It's very similar. So as Power Pages can be updated by a pro developer after a citizen developer does his job? So that's a great question. Nick, you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of how, for example, our team is structured. We have essentially kind of we refer to them as technicians, so the people who are doing some of the low code, no code stuff, maybe some basic JavaScript skills, and then just kind of segmenting out and learning how to have those two types of resources working together. One of the big ways now is Power Pages supports PCF controls. So PCF controls, if you're not familiar, are kind of a base component within the Power Platform that can be leveraged on model-driven apps. They can be leveraged in Canvas apps, and that they can now be leveraged on Power Pages. So it's a way for a developer to essentially kind of build a widget or some sort of a component that can be added onto your Power Pages site. So essentially, you could have a pro code developer building out their PCF control, and then when they're done, they just kind of hand it off to the low-code person who can kind of drag and drop it and put it on the screen.
And there is things like you can there's more tight integration with things like Visual Studio now. Like when you hit edit code, it will open up a web version of that. So it gives you a lot tighter integration than what we had even 6 months ago, I believe. It's lots changed in the last year of the Power Pages. Now, this may be a question more for you, Nick. I'm kind of curious. What kind of demand are you finding for the Power Platform in Canada? Power Platform developers, I assume this is a question from Vimka. I'm not sure if he's referring to Power Platform or he's referring to Power Pages. You want to answer the Power Pages side, and I'll answer the rest of the Power Platform side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is probably similar for both. Like as far as we're seeing, there's such a strong demand. We see people. We always see partners looking for more resources to work on projects. Our biggest problem is kind of keeping up with the work. So as far as I can tell, the demand is super strong for developers all across the Power Platform stack.
Yeah, I would agree as well. And on the Power Page side, like it's very similar as well. But on the it's really, really difficult to find like Power Apps developers now. So, and to become a Power Apps developer, you can become a Power Apps developer with a fairly shallow learning curve to ramp up there to become a functional developer at that point. Usually we can onboard a developer in a couple months to be functional, and then to get for the more advanced stuff, it might take a little longer. What do you find the ramp up time is here, Nick, for Power Pages specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because people will come to us and say, well, kind of, how do you find these people? Are you training them? It's like, yeah, like people don't show up at our door and say, hey, I'm good with Power Pages. Like, can I have a job? It's like those people just generally don't exist, right? So essentially everyone we hire, there's that training period. And again, there's kind of that first step of learn model-driven apps, learn kind of the Power Platform basics, learn how to do Dataverse, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If they have those skills, then the ramp up time is relatively short, a few months, and people are kind of ready to get into the real world and working on things. If they kind of got to do both, I think it's probably closer to 6 months, where it's kind of right. 2 or 3 months of each one to kind of get up and running. So yeah, when someone comes to us, if they already have any sort of Power Platform experience, that's a huge bonus. But
to me, it's the JavaScript is the hardest part. From not hardest part, but it's the most learning how to do it in a specific case. If you're coming from complete green to trying to learn Power Pages, that's the biggest learning curve building a base Power Page and building you can learn pretty rapidly, as Nick's saying there as well.
Yeah, we're traditionally hiring just generic web developers and then training them on the Power Platform, because that's easier to do than taking someone who may even know a few things about Power Platform, but hoping to train them on how to become a developer. That's a different beast.
And Darren is asking a question about one of our most favorite features now that Microsoft's investing in. So it says from the UK here. This is Darren from the UK. And I'll just go to the core question here. It's very helpful. My question is about Copilot. What is your thoughts on the Copilot new additions to Power Pages? Nick, do you want to start us off there? And I'll actually put my screen up here in a second after Nick does this thing.
Yeah. So with Copilot, I think, there's been quite a few announcements over the last year or so when it comes to Copilot. Within Power Pages, they're essentially giving you a Copilot to help you learn how to use the platform. They're giving you Copilot to create pages, to create content. I think the one I'm kind of most excited about is in the recent release notes where they talk about Copilot for the actual users of your site. So rather than, up until now, it's mostly been about Copilot for the makers, so the people building the site. But soon we're going to have a Copilot that you can actually turn on and expose to the users of the site. And that's going to help them do things like, find content on your site or fill out forms on your site. So that's what I'm really excited about. I think it's all pretty new. I know that when we, for example, the functionality that you can tell it, hey, I wanted to build a form. It will do that. It's, it's still there's still a few limitations in there where I think in everyday use, we're not using it on a regular basis. In that particular case, it's always going to create a new table. You don't really have much control about what solution it goes into. There's kind of all these little things that are like, it demo's good, but it may not quite be there yet for prime time. So it's not something that I'm using on a day-to-day basis, but I know specifically around it generating a liquid code or web API code, those types of things. That's where I think is really cool.
Yeah, here's what Nick is referring to when he talked about the form side. As he mentioned, it does create a new table, so it's not going to leverage all the stuff you already have. But it's pretty powerful from the demo side. I agree with Nick. I typically will whip it out the old-fashioned way and just point to an existing form or existing list. In this case, it does a pretty decent job for creation of pages and those kind of things and kind of stylization of it. But for the forms, I kind of lean towards where Nick's at also on that, unless I have a brand new table that I want to create in this case. But it is pretty darn handy. I think the directionally where they're heading is pretty amazing, though. I think Nick and I we're looking forward to a lot of the other stuff around that. I think on the Canvas side, I think it's a little bit stronger than it is on the Power Page side at this time, at least.
Yeah,
cool.
My other big problem is that it's not available so much in Canada, so I can't play with it as much.
All right, so we got some other ones here coming in as well. All right, this was a good one. How do we migrate a site from dev to QA to prod? So what kind of ALM recommendations would you have around that?
Just build it in production, I think, is the best plan. No, don't do that. So yeah, that's been kind of a pain in the you-know-what for the last, 15 years when it comes to Power Pages. And what makes it such a challenge with Power Pages is, especially up until recently, is that most of the work that you do is actually not captured within a solution. It's not metadata. It's not like, oh, I'm changing tables and I'm changing I'm changing views, that sort of things. It's actual data within Dataverse. And up until very recently, that data was within the Dataverse database, and so was not movable with solutions. So while you did change some forms, you change some views, you'd have to move that with solutions, but the actual creation of your pages or the creation of your views or the creation of your Power Pages forms, they didn't move over as part of a solution. So you had different techniques. There's a tool in the XRM toolbox from Tangi called the Portal Records Mover, which for many years was the way that most people did it. Then Microsoft moved to kind of recommending the configuration migration tool, which is a tool from a Microsoft tool that's used to move data between these different environments. And to be honest, that's still the tool that us at Engineered Code use on a day-to-day basis. There's also a tool within the Pack CLI. So there's a way that you can download your portal's configuration in the Pack CLI, and then you can upload that up back to another environment. Now, these days, there is a new technique, and that is that Microsoft has introduced what they call the enhanced data model. And as part of that enhanced data model, they are making these tables solution aware. So you can actually include that configuration within your environment or within your solutions and move it between environments. Now, this tool the enhanced data model is still in preview. I don't really recommend that anyone go out and do this to their production environment, that they use this as their ALM story right now. I think talk to me in a year or two, and that's probably what everyone will be doing. But there are still a number of limitations with it. Again, it's in preview. There's no migration story from people who are currently using what's called the old model, or called the standard model. So while the enhanced data model is the future, I don't think we're quite in the future yet. So me personally, I really like the control and the specificity that the configuration migration tool gives me. So that lets me move over exactly what records I know what's going to happen every single time. And I think in 2 years, my answer will be the enhanced data model and using solutions. But I don't know when, within that next 2 years, when that's going to change. Is it going to be 6 months from now where I'm going to say, hey, this is ready for prime time? Is it going to be a year from now? Is it going to be 18 months? I'm not sure when that's going to be. But the enhanced data model for sure is the future, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, I love where they're going with it. It's a matter of it has some quirks right now in some areas and some oddness. But so basically, to turn that on, what Nick is referring to, you would open up whatever environment you want to go to. You go to Power Page Sites, and you're going to see up top, as you select this, you'll see the switch to enhanced data model right here. Now, once you do that, then while you're in your site, let me just get out of here real quick. There we go. You can, not there. Let me just go back to my site here. And when you go to your solutions on your site, you'll notice there's a new option once you have the enhanced data model on, where you can go up to Add Existing, and then you'll see Site right there. Select your site, hit go, and then you can migrate that like you do any other solution. So it is pretty nice. Now, Nick, when you have a more complex version of this, where you have multiple, you have like you want to just cherry pick a change, for example, how would you recommend like just getting those 4 or 5 changes using Configuration Manager over from dev to QA, for example?
Yeah, so that's what I really like about the configuration migration tool, is that you can specify a fetched XML query to identify exactly which rows that you want to move over. So when we're defining our schema files, so you essentially list, here are the tables I want to move. In those tables, here are the columns I want to move. And then you also get to specify a fetch XML statement that said, within that table, here are the rows that I want to move. So when we're working on a project, we often, say we complete phase 1, and now we're on to phase 2, and there's just a few change. We'll kind of go back from scratch and say, okay, what are the few records we want to move? So if we know we've moved some web pages, or we know we've changed some web pages, we will identify those web pages specifically by name in a fetch XML query. Then we know we're only moving that. The other thing we do is when we're naming records, so whether it's web templates or site settings or different records that we know that we're creating, we use a prefix. So we'll say, usually it's like, the name of the client. So let's say for we could say Pragmatic at the beginning of it. So then we know that when we're moving over records, we can move over anything that starts with that particular prefix, and then it keeps us pretty safe from moving things over. That's the thing that isn't my favorite about, say, using the pack CLI, where what it does is it downloads everything and then it moves everything. That to me is just scary. Like your dev environment and your production environment are usually not that close to being the same. People have updated content in production that they probably haven't updated in dev. They've made a news announcement, whatever it is. So moving the whole thing over to me is just always scary. So I like to be very, very careful about what we move over. We've also incorporated that into our pull request process. So we export using the configuration migration tool. We take that zip file, we unzip it, we unpack it, and then that goes up into our Azure DevOps. We have a pull request where we can review all the work that's been done as well. So we've kind of have all that built into our ALM process.
Awesome. And those came in. We have a whole bunch of them coming in now. Let's see. This one is from Sean. Sean's question is: Can we create a can we create a Power Page that links to a Power App, but only if they're inside a firewalled organization rather than a general public? So I'm trying to understand the question directly, but I'm assuming what he means is if somebody's in the library, for example, and they're on an open channel, not in my company's channel. Can I show the link to the Power App, a conditional link, basically, Nick? Is there any way to kind of register the fact that I know we can register the fact of who they are and what domain suffix they have and those kind of things. But how is it possible to even recognize whether they're in a public network or not?
So you can restrict access to a Power Pages site via IP address. So even though, I mean, that Power Pages site is still going to be sitting in the public cloud, but you can say only people from this specific IP address can access my site. So I think that would probably be the best. I know that there is also the concept now of what's called a private versus a public site. So on a private site, even to get to the site, you have to log in with Azure Active Directory. So that's another layer of security you can put in there. But I think if someone's within a particular organization, there's going to be a well-known list of IP addresses generally that the people would be coming from. So you could restrict that site to those IP addresses.
Now, good question. Thank you, Sean, for asking that. And we're down to our last few, I think, here also. Nick, where do you typically store your files at for Power Pages? Like I say files, I mean like the uploads that the customer might do.
Yeah, I mean, that question has changed, or the answer to that question has changed a bit over the years, specifically around the pricing of file storage within Dataverse. Back in the day where everything costs the same and Microsoft kind of jacked up the price to $50 a gigabyte, everyone was kind of in a big panic to move as much as they could off of Dataverse and into other data storage because it wasn't cheap. Now that we've got, reasonably priced file storage, the investment in kind of other solutions may not be kind of worth it as much anymore. I would say that most customers are interested in the SharePoint integration. So if someone's uploading something, often I say we're using SharePoint. I think the support for the new file and image type columns within Dataverse, that's extremely popular.
Game changer. Yeah.
And again, with the pricing changes, that makes it a lot more palatable to go down a direction like that. There are some integrations with Azure Storage Blobs, but to be honest, those are relatively kind of legacy. They were put in by ADX Studio back in the day, and I don't see a whole lot of love for those recently. So I would say that SharePoint is still very popular, especially when you have kind of people in the back end wanting to do things like edit those documents and kind of fall and actually leverage SharePoint for the features that SharePoint has versus just a spot to store a file. But yeah, the file column and the image column types in Dataverse, the support for that, that's been a big game changer as well. So whereas before it was like almost exclusively SharePoint, now it's a question again.
Yeah, I like Dataverse also because they separated the file cost there as well. And I think it all depends on the security requirements. It's always it depends answer, right? And as kind of Nick's alluding to, if the back office team, the people inside your organization, it's very hard to restrict SharePoint and say, hey, you can have access, Nick, you can have access to this one, but not this one. Where Dataverse has that row level security, account level security, all that stuff's kind of just all built into it. So it makes it very easy to protect the file storage. Mm-hmm. If it's more about just, hey, customers upload these files and we have this team of people that are going to all process these files, whether it's customer A or customer B, then SharePoint's a great option for that also. Yeah. And it's not that hard to set up either, which is nice. Nick, a question we have here is about certification tests from Microsoft. I just had to do one recently. The PL400, this is a question from Sanjay, does have some Power Page stuff in it. I think it's supposed to also be in the PL900. Are you familiar with any of the ones, Nick, that you can think of that might have?
No, I honestly haven't done a certification test since I think CRM version 4. I've kind of heard that there are kind of odd question. You'll see a question here too on Power Pages. I don't know if there's anything specific to Power Pages right now in terms of the certifications. But yeah, it's just not an area that I focused on a lot.
Yeah.
I think that they're starting to do more things like trying to get more community content. I know that there's the PowerCat team specific members for Power Pages now that are trying to get more content out there, more training opportunities. But I don't know if there's any specific certifications related to Power Pages.
Yeah, it's more part of existing ones. Like
Yeah.
the PL400 has the whole platform. It's a developer class, a developer certification for those that are doing JavaScript and C# and all those kind of things inside of Power Platform. And they threw some love in there to Power Pages. So you'll see that in the open site where they show you what sections and how much percentage it is. They do show some Power Page stuff out there if you're looking at getting certified, Sanjay. Nick, while we're waiting for more questions here, also, you want to show us an example of, you mentioned an golf example that maybe kind of what Power Pages can do.
Yeah, here, let me share my screen.
And while he's sharing that, also, Nick has got a great series on learning Power Pages. We have a great series as well on Power Pages. Nick's chopped up his into really short, like 1 or 2 minute videos, which are really, really concise. And then mine are more longer videos, but they have more topics inside of each one. And there is Nick. Let me go ahead and, okay, that should be you there, Nick.
Yeah, so let me just go here. So I'm in my thing. So what I like to do outside of work is golf. That's always been it's been my passion for the last little while. Unfortunately, here in Canada, the golf season is
2 weeks long?
short.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
With global warming, it's made 3 weeks now.
Well, exactly. Yeah, great. So when I do my kind of examples and I'm working on a demo or something like that, often it involves golf. And my number one thing, if anyone here is a member at Augusta National, that's where they play the Masters every year. I'd love a tee time there. So just shout out to all the Augusta National members that I'm sure are on this call. But so essentially what I built out here is just kind of different scenarios for golfing. So I've got golf courses here. I just got to sign in here first. So basically,
this is kind of cool. So you notice that it restricted Nick from seeing data until he signed in. So it's kind of cool feature of Power Pages.
Yeah, exactly. So now what I have here is a list of the different golf courses. You can see Augusta National. You can see Cook Municipal, which is the golf course in my hometown of Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And I could just open up one of these and edit it. So once that goes up, then you'll see now I do use this for all sorts of different videos and stuff that I do. So we've got maps on here. We've got different sort of rankings in here. So really a very relatively complex form that kind of has a bunch of different details. But the one thing I want to point out here is I'm just going to add, go there. I'm going to go back into my design studio. And then what I have is also a maintenance request section. So earlier I'd mentioned that within Power Pages itself, if you're just doing the developer plan, there is no Dynamics 365 customer engagement tables. So you don't get the case table. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're not using Dynamics that you can't build help desk. And in fact, the help desk functionality is relatively straightforward to recreate. So that's what I've done in this particular example. I'm going to preview this. So in this case, what I have is this situation is, hey, you're a member at a golf course and you want to submit a maintenance request. Say the ball washer is broken on hole number 2. So what I've done is I've created a very kind of simple help desk scenario, which is just, here's a list, here's my maintenance requests. I can go in here and create a maintenance request. That's going to kick me over to this maintenance request page where I can put in something. Here I had some JavaScript I was demonstrating that I can hide or show this based on what's in the name. I can pick which golf course that I'm a member at, so I'll do that. I can select which hole. So let me select that. And then I can submit this. So I've got this whole kind of support desk, help desk scenario, but I'm not using the case entity within Dynamics 365. So it is something that you may want to consider. You kind of have to look at the trade-off of Dynamics 365. There's licensing costs associated with that. Don't feel like if you want to do a help desk that you must use Dynamics 365. There are other ways that you can accomplish those goals by creating your own custom tables. And it's something that we honestly see quite a bit.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. So as you can see, that it's super easy to build these sites out. What Nick was showing there had some more advanced things like geolocation and some extra controls in there as well. But to start with, it's very easy to kind of get that ball rolling. Again, I think the trick to start with is always start the knowledge of your app first, get it working, build your back office application, get it working the way you want, and then jump over to Power Pages next. Well, Nick, I know we're about to wrap up here, but how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so feel free to connect with me I'm on LinkedIn. We've got our Twitter account, which is engineered_code. As Brian mentioned, we do a tip every Tuesday on Power Pages. So that's on our YouTube channel. We also do a monthly Portals community call. So that's a monthly call where we talk about, what the latest news is, and we pick one particular topic to deep dive on. So usually about 30 minutes on one particular topic. We did one last week. The topic was the enhanced data model. We got another one coming up here in a couple of weeks on September 14th. Our topic is some advanced JavaScript topics. So we've got one of our developers here who's going to be talking to us about creating a web service with Liquid, and then also some advanced kind of JavaScript things where we're replicating some lookup behavior and just some cool kind of advanced JavaScript stuff. So you can find all the details for that on our site, which is engineeredcode.com, where we have links to our YouTube channel, our community calls, our social media, all that sort of stuff.
Excellent. And then for me, you can find us at pragmaticworks.com. That's pragmaticworks.com, and you'll find us on YouTube as well, and the channel you're looking at right now. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all of your questions that you guys have asked as well. You feel free to keep those questions. We'll keep an eye on the questions in this video as well. But thank you so much for watching us today. And Nick, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, just thanks for everyone for attending. And looking forward to connecting with all of you in the future.
All right. Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Hackathons can effectively make learning relatable for your team by providing an interactive and engaging learning experience. The process starts with a planning session where we identify a small to medium-sized business need for a prototype. Following a one-day training session, we collaborate with your team in a 2 to 3 day build session where everyone is actively involved. And by the end of your hackathon, your team has developed new skills and you will have a working prototype to show for it.